My father was a wealthy merchant of great renown. The world often mocks that no merchant is without cunning, and indeed my father was greedy for profit, counting the family's silver every few days, while muttering about setting aside half as my dowry. Yet, in the end, this cunning merchant spent everything he had, for the sake of his principles, on a deal that brought him no profit. After his death, I inherited his scale. Its heavy counterweight was the common people. I was the daughter he adopted, and his only child. Father was shrewd. For the 14 years he raised me, ever since I could understand, I often heard him clicking his abacus, tallying the costs of my food, clothing, and upbringing, then solemnly informing me that the price of his future care and funeral must not fall below the sum. This absurd ledger grew thicker by the day, forcing me to study hard, learning the abacus and account books alongside him, tainted by the smell of coin at far too young an age. Now grown, I can finally stand on my own, becoming the young mistress the clerks speak of. Yet father broke his promise. I knelt in the funeral hall, staring blankly at the coffin before me, while mournful wails filled my ears. A draft swept through, rustling the funeral banners and scattering paper money across the floor. One piece clung to the back of my hand. Father had hanged himself. He was determined to die before taking his own life. He dismissed everyone, even sending me away to fetch wine from the distillery. The short old man had to stack 2 stools just to reach the beam, where he tied the white silk noose. When I returned with the wine, I saw him hanging high, like a faded lantern beneath the eaves, dressed in the new clothes I had made for him. Father had no other relatives besides me. Old Fu, the steward who had served him all his life, knelt behind me, weeping bitterly as he bid him farewell. Yet not a single tear fell from my eyes. I plucked the paper money from my hand, rubbing it between my fingers, feeling as though I were trapped in a nightmare. My father had always been a coward, afraid of death, even flinching at falling leaves. How could he have died like this? Lost in thought, a group of people barged into the courtyard. Their leader shouted arrogantly, "Miss Sue, accept our condolences. We're here on orders to remind you. This Sioux residence now belongs to the Zhou family. Out of kindness, the master grants you 5 more days. Don't linger and make things difficult for him." Uncle Fu was furious. The deceased should be respected. How dare you? I cut him off, turning my head calmly. Don't worry, the Sioux family has always upheld integrity. The group swaggered off, tossing back a final remark. Make sure you clean up properly, and don't leave any of those funeral papers behind. Bad luck. Uncle Fu wiped away angry tears. I stood and gently touched Father's coffin, whispering, "Rest in peace, Father. Your daughter can carry this weight." After settling Father's funeral affairs, I moved out of the mansion I called home for over a decade. Father had handed all our wealth to Prime Minister Zhou. I watched as they tore down the Sioux family plaque, hacking it into firewood. This estate had already been ransacked inside and out, even my personal belongings inspected repeatedly, lest I smuggled out a single copper coin. In the end, I only took the ancestral tablets of the Sioux family and entrusted them to Cloudsoar Temple, Taoist Clearwind. The abbot of Cloudsoar Temple and an old friend of my father kindly prepared a room to shelter me. I declined his offer, intending to leave this place as soon as possible. Yet I couldn't escape. The last person I wanted to see intercepted me and forcibly took me to a manor in the western outskirts. Yanglan, with the chaos of war outside, where can a delicate woman like you go? I replied indifferently, Yuan Baizhao. Where I go is none of your concern. With a complicated expression, Yuan Baizhao questioned, Yanglan, I am your husband. Husband, I cut him off with a cold laugh. Young Master Zhao is now the esteemed son, in law, of the Prime Minister's mansion. Please mind your dignity. Pain flashed across his face, and his tone grew more earnest. Yanglan, I had no choice. This calamity began with the Zhao family. In the late autumn 2 years ago, barbarians breached the borders, and the emperor relocated the capital south to Feng'an City. We merchants of Feng'an were awestruck by the sudden arrival of His Majesty, never imagining disaster would follow silently. When the enemy invaded, The emperor turned tail and fled, an utterly disgraceful act. Among the high-ranking officials, General of the Northern Border Qingang and the emperor's uncle, Prince Everett, refused to abandon the northern territories, fighting valiantly to the end. Naturally, they became the people's beacon of hope. This sent the emperor into a panic. He branded both the general of the northern border and Prince Everett as traitors, and issued an edict to thoroughly investigate the rebels. 5 months ago, the Zhao family was exposed, and letters exchanged with Prince Everett were discovered in their possession. Yuanbai Zhao's parents and his legitimate younger brother were all convicted and imprisoned. Yuanbai Zhao's father succumbed to the brutal torture and died unjustly. His mother, overwhelmed by shock and grief, passed away soon after, her body not yet cold in the grave. His 14-year-old younger brother had both legs broken and lingered in agony for days before dying with bitter resentment. The Su and Zhao families had been close for generations, and the letters concerning the rebellion also mentioned the Su family. To absolve himself of guilt, my father handed over all our family assets to the current Prime Minister Zhou Kongyu and penned a blood-written letter to prove his innocence. He insisted he was merely a dull-witted, money-grubbing merchant with no rebellious intentions, then hanged himself. Prime Minister Zhou took my family's money and promptly dismissed the case, disregarding me, a useless orphan girl. Suspiciously, amidst this calamity, only the eldest son of the Zhao family, Yuanbai Zhao, emerged unscathed. Long before the incident, he had taken half of the Zhao family's fortune and sought refuge with the Marquis of Dingxiang, becoming the Marquis's adopted son. Moreover, Yuanbai Zhao was once betrothed to me. After my father's death, he returned my betrothal letter and instead attached himself to the Prime Minister's fourth daughter, Lily Zhou. Their grand wedding is set for early spring next year. Yuanbai Zhao. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. I heard it was you who begged Prime Minister Zhou to spare me. He stiffened, then forced a bitter smile. Yes, Lily Zhou was infatuated with me and willing to plead with the Prime Minister. To protect you, I had no choice but to make a deal with the devil. A tear escaped the corner of my eye. So that's how it was. Yuanbai Zhao pulled me into a tight embrace, speaking tenderly. Yanglan, I'm glad you understand. Don't worry, I'll take care of you. Though, for now, you'll have to bear the indignity of no formal status. I clenched my fists tightly, reminding myself that guards were outside the door, barely restraining the urge to plunge the dagger hidden in my sleeve into Yuanbai Zhao's chest. Yuanbai Zhao. Oh, Yuanbai Zhao. We've known each other for over a decade. Did you truly take me for a fool? Lily Zhou is a noble lady from a prestigious family, always living in seclusion. How could she possibly obsess over an outsider? Moreover, the Prime Minister's mansion is of such high status. What could a mere ninth-rank scholar like you possibly offer to catch Prime Minister Zhou's eye? This was a trap, one that sacrificed both the Su and Zhao families to feed a pack of greedy, monstrous devils. Yuanbai Zhao confined me here, forbidding me from stepping even half a foot outside the room. This estate was called Lake Heart Pavilion, surrounded by water on all sides. He must have been certain of my fear of water to choose such an aquatic prison. He even assigned 2 maids and 4 guards to watch me, then disappeared for 3 or 4 days, likely afraid the Prime Minister's mansion would discover his hidden treasure. I made no fuss, spending my days embroidering by the window, gradually lulling my watchers into complacency. Then, one late night, I changed into men's clothing, climbed out the back window, and swam away from that place. Yuanbai Zhao made a fatal mistake. He underestimated me, thinking my weakness would shackle me for life. In the first few years after my father brought me home, certain circumstances left me mute. A little girl who couldn't speak. My father was close to the Zhao family and arranged for Yuanbai Zhao to be my playmate. Though he was eloquent from childhood and tried every trick to coax words from me, I remained stubbornly silent, wide-eyed but tight-lipped, until one day, when he accidentally fell into the pond while playing. Terrified of water, and with no one else around, I finally screamed for help in panic. After this incident, My father deemed Yuan Bai Zhao my destined benefactor, readily agreeing when the Zhao family later proposed a childhood betrothal. But I'd long known, no one in this world is another's lifelong refuge. I couldn't wait forever for rescue. If I feared water, I'd learn to swim. If someone was important, I'd protect them myself. Now that my childhood benefactor had become my tormentor, I cast him aside. In this high-stakes gamble, I lost one round. But it's not yet time to surrender. The lake wasn't large, and I soon swam across. After passing through a small grove, I stepped onto a narrow path and sprinted all the way to a nearby farmhouse. This was Uncle Fu's home. Deep in the night, he was still awake, draped in his coat and staring blankly in the yard. When he suddenly saw me standing outside the fence, drenched and disheveled, he nearly jumped out of his skin. "Uncle Fu, it's me," I whispered urgently. "I need to leave. Are my things still here?" Uncle Fu immediately understood. He hastily brought out a horse and handed me a bundle, asking anxiously, "Young mistress, where can you go? The barbarians have broken through the northern pass. Chaos reigns up north, and the south is the Zhou family's territory." I took the reins and patted the black pony's head. "Don't worry, the world is vast. There's always a way to survive." I spurred my horse through the shattered night, riding northward. My father wouldn't die in vain. That stubborn old man left this world in humiliation, and I'll avenge him for it. I still don't understand why Yuan Bai Zhao went to such extremes. Those were his own parents. Moreover, Prime Minister Zhou and his faction could have eliminated him entirely. How did they allow Yuan Bai Zhao to remain unscathed and even pave his way to success? Yuan Bai Zhao must be hiding some unspeakable secret. Right now, I'm too weak to confront him directly, so I can only retreat strategically. I must seek out Prince Everett. I want to see for myself what kind of man he is. The one my father was willing to die for. To reach the north, I had to take the waterways. Traveling day and night, I first headed to Huchuan Village. Huchuan Village was a fishing village nestled along the river. Since my father's business spanned both northern and southern shores, he spent a fortune to build a ferry dock there for merchant ships to moor. This dock also provided livelihoods for many villagers. Huchuan Village gained renown, attracting endless streams of merchants and travelers, filling the pockets of the old ferrymen who worked the river year-round. Some villagers set up tea stalls or opened taverns, while others took on odd jobs hauling goods, all finding new ways to make a living. And my father became the great benefactor in their eyes, having endured too many hard years. The common folk cared not for the original purpose behind building this ferry. They only knew those merchant ships put an extra dish on their tables and new clothes on their children's backs. So they praised his goodness with overflowing gratitude. Amidst the chorus of praise, my father grew ever more generous. 3 years ago, he built a schoolhouse in the fishing village. He said the common people shouldn't have to sell their labor all their lives. Books were their boats, and only through learning could they cross the great river that had trapped their ancestors for generations. I was deeply moved at the time, thinking my father had finally earned the title of great benefactor. Then suddenly he changed tack. At the very least, we'll have a few more literate clerks. I knew he was a cunning merchant. The night wind brushed against my face, leaving a damp layer of frost. I touched my cheek and laughed at myself, thinking I must be exhausted to keep remembering the old man's affairs. The Sioux family's merchant ships had been confiscated, leaving only fishing boats to cross the river. Evening approached, and the river lay cold and deserted. Not a single vessel in sight. I had no choice but to seek lodging in the village, planning to pay extra silver to depart at dawn the next day. The fishing village was far more desolate than I remembered, with only a few scattered households lighting their cooking fires. I stopped outside one courtyard and recognized the old man inside as a fisherman named Hu. Eagerly, I asked, "Neighbor, I'm a passing merchant. May I stay the night at your place?" Old man who didn't recognize me, his dim eyes squinted at me for a long while before deciding I didn't seem like a troublemaker, and he finally opened the gate. "Come in and sit." Old man whose home was a single modest house with a wobbly table propped up by a rock where one leg had broken. On it sat a bowl of thin soup and a few flatbreads. Beside the table sat a girl who looked about 15 or 16, delicate in appearance, but unfortunately blind from birth. Hearing the commotion, she asked curiously, "Father, who's there?" Old man, who coughed a few times and said, "A traveler from afar. Go warm up some bread." The blind girl steadied herself against the table and began feeling her way toward the stove by memory. I hurriedly stopped her. "No need, no need. I've already eaten on the road. Don't trouble yourself." I struck up a conversation with old man, and learned that the ferry had long been occupied by the local magistrates' men. Recently, they had been continuously transporting timber, claiming the emperor was building yet another grand palace. The village of Huchuan now only had elderly folks, women, and children left. The young men had either gone to the battlefield or been conscripted by the emperor to work on the palace. The blind girl was named A. Xiang, old man whose daughter. His son had gone to guard the frontier, and his wife had passed away early, leaving him to care for this blind girl alone. Speaking of his daughter, old man whose voice was full of tenderness. This poor girl's had a hard life. She's clever, can memorize a poem after hearing it just once. If only she'd been born in better times. She might have even become a teacher. I asked in surprise. I heard that years ago, a free school was built here. Why didn't she go? Old man, who gave a bitter laugh. These past 2 years, the courts taxed us into the next life. We can barely survive. Who has time for schooling? Besides, the teacher was dragged off to do hard labor too. I fell silent. My father probably knew about these things, but he'd never told me. Just then, a sudden commotion erupted outside the courtyard. Shouts and clamoring, as if someone had come to make an arrest. Fearing it might be men sent by Yuan Baizhao, I jolted into action, slipping out the back window and hiding behind the woodpile, straining my ears nervously. To my surprise, it was a group of tax collectors. After a round of loud shouting, the neighing of the little black horse rang out. My heart clenched as I heard one tax collector snarl, "This horse will cover your unpaid land tax. Let go, you old fool." Old man, who pleaded desperately, "This isn't my horse. It belongs to a guest staying here. Take my boat instead. Please, just leave the horse." The tax collector shoved old man, who hard to the ground, and spat. "What's that rotten boat worth? Let go or I'll cut you down." Xiang, startled awake, stumbled out of the house, begging, "Don't hit my father. Please, I beg you, don't hurt him." The tax collector let out a leering laugh. "We warned you. If you can't pay, your daughter goes out to sell. Stop playing the victim, you wretched peasants." Old man, who shouted in grief and indignation, "We're not troublemakers. My son is a soldier. Our family doesn't even have farmland. What land tax are we supposed to pay?" Seeing the tax collector truly about to draw his sword, I had no choice but to grit my teeth and rush out, stopping old man, who was desperately clinging to the reins, whispering, "It's all right, just give it to them." Tears welling in his eyes. Old man, who loosened his grip on the reins inch by inch. The tax collectors triumphantly led the little black horse away, the poor creature pawing at the ground and looking back at me pleadingly, but all I could do was helplessly support old man, who as we went inside. That little black horse was my father's birthday gift to me. For a fleeting moment, I truly wanted to fight them to the death to get my horse back, but I couldn't. My father used his own life to teach me this lesson. Commoners fighting against officials is harder than climbing to heaven. If I'd stolen the horse and fled, old man whose family would surely suffer the consequences. Besides, with a great river blocking the way ahead and pursuers waiting to capture me, where could I possibly run? Old man, who kept apologizing remorsefully, "I've brought trouble upon you. What shall we do now? What shall we do?" Old man, who told me that over the past 3 years, the imperial court had raised taxes 5 times under the pretext of war. His family owned no land, yet they were still forced to pay land taxes. Refusal to pay was branded as aiding the enemy and treason. How dare you commoners withhold food while our soldiers shed blood and sacrifice their lives? Hearing this, my heart sank completely. While the emperor cowered in the south, he repeatedly slandered the achievements of Prince Everett and the general of the northern border, accusing them of disloyalty. Not only were military provisions withheld, but even winter coats for the troops were denied. The reason my father was labeled a rebel was that, in the past 2 years, he had partnered with the Zhao family to deliver 20,000 bushels of grain to the north. According to the letter, it was handed directly to Prince Everett, though my father denied it to his death. Under the betrayal of a spy, the discrepancies in the accounts were uncovered. So then, where did the grain collected by the tax officials under imperial orders end up? Misfortunes never come singly. The next day, the local magistrate's son Fu arrived with a troop of soldiers and stationed them in the village, frequently patrolling the area to prevent the villagers from fleeing. He claimed it was to avoid a famine, fearing that if all the commoners left, there would be no one left to farm the land. Just as I was burning with anxiety, one night, chaos suddenly erupted in the village. It turned out that 5 northern refugees had crossed the river by boat and collapsed on the shore, barely alive. Kind-hearted villagers carried them into the village. After drinking some hot soup, they finally regained enough strength to speak, weeping as they said, "We're from Dongyu village on the northern bank. The barbarians have invaded, the officials fled, and everyone in the village was killed. Only a few of us survived." The crowd was shocked. Old man who pushed his way through and urgently asked, "Barbarians? How could the barbarians have reached the river? What about the garrison troops?" The man wiped his tears, sobbing uncontrollably. Without food and supplies, how could they hold the line? Many of the soldiers who retreated from the northern frontier have already starved to death. My nephew was one of them. The villagers finally learned that after the barbarians breached the pass, they slaughtered every city in their path, burning corpses for miles and destroying vast swathes of farmland. Yet the soldiers waited in vain for the court's promised provisions, leading to successive defeats and nearly half their number dead or wounded. Old man who turned deathly pale, collapsing onto the ground as he muttered to himself, "How could this be? How could this be?" As if realizing something, he suddenly scrambled to his feet and dashed out of the village like a madman. Sensing disaster, I hurried after him, only to see him charging toward the riverbank. A large ship was moored by the river, where soldiers were herding horses and endlessly loading plundered grain onto the vessel. Old man who grabbed one soldier's sleeve, trembling as he demanded, "Where has our grain been taken? Why are people starving to death? Why?" The soldier turned blankly, looking toward Magistrate Sun Fu, who was striding over in haste. Sun Fu, torch in hand, furiously kicked Old Man, who square in the chest, sending him sprawling, and barked, "Crazy old fool, get lost." I swiftly stepped in front of Old Man, and hurriedly dragged him back to the village. Old Man, whose hoarse sobs were drowned out by the waves. The villagers gathered at the village entrance, their gloomy faces illuminated by torchlight, filled with confusion like children abandoned by their parents. I turned my gaze back to the river and realized the boat docked by the shore was once my father's merchant vessel, now laden with plundered wealth. It sailed into the night. Doubt began to spread through the village, reaching its peak when Sun Fu brazenly occupied the finest house in the village, the schoolhouse my father had built, and sent his servants to steal from every household. The villagers finally couldn't bear it and collectively confronted Sun Fu. Clearly, having just finished a hearty meal, Sun Fu swaggered out, picking his teeth, and barked arrogantly, "What's all this noise? Is it such a crime for this official to eat a few bites of your meat? With barbarian armies at our borders, without my protection, you lowly peasants would already have your heads rolling in the dirt." Hearing this, the villagers' clenched fists loosened once more. After all, compared to the corrupt officials seen everywhere, the bloodthirsty barbarians were far more terrifying. Yet soon, the so-called protection became a cruel joke. At noon 3 days later, the soldiers suddenly, and without warning, kicked open the wooden gate, barging into the house and aggressively dragging Ah Xiang outside. Ah Xiang instinctively sensed danger and struggled desperately. Dad, help me." Old Man, who, panicked, lunged forward and clung tightly to Ah Xiang. "What are you doing? Let go of my daughter. Let go." A flicker of guilt crossed the soldier's face, but he didn't stop. I grabbed his arm and shouted sharply, "This is abduction. Have you no fear of the law?" The soldier shoved me aside, raising his voice defensively. "We're following orders. Step aside." The soldiers forcibly carried Ah Xiang away. Old man who, and I chased them out of the yard, only to find the entire village in chaos. One woman after another was being dragged from their homes, their elderly parents wailing and chasing after them, only to be met with kicks and punches. Soon, the villagers surged onto the riverbank, watching as the soldiers tied the women up one by one with ropes. They burned with rage and shouted, "By what right are you taking them? By what right?" The soldiers raised their swords, caught between the furious villagers. Prefect Sun Fu arrived with his hands clasped behind his back, cleared his throat, and declared loudly, "Listen well, all of you, these women are sacrificing themselves for the nation. Anyone who obstructs will be charged with treason." Suddenly, a young boy pushed through the crowd, stomping his feet and shouting urgently, "Don't listen to him. I heard everything. The barbarian army has taken the North Bank. He plans to surrender, offering our sisters and provisions to them in exchange for a position in their ranks." Instantly, the riverbank erupted in wails and curses. Seeing his scheme exposed, Sun Fu shamelessly sneered, "So what if I surrender? The emperor has already fled. Our dynasty is finished. Naturally, I must serve a new master." He then pointed his whip at the group of women. "I've shown utmost benevolence by letting you trade your bodies for survival. Don't push your luck after getting a bargain. Take them all away." As his words fell, the soldiers tugged on the ropes, herding the women onto the boats like livestock. Xiang tripped and fell to the ground, rolling and wailing. "I won't go. I won't go. I'd rather die than go. Father, father." Sun Fu's face twisted savagely as he raised his whip high. "Damn it, if I can't beat the barbarians, I can sure as hell beat you. You disgrace my kindness." The lash descended, and Xiang's agonized scream shattered my last hesitation. I felt as though I'd been nailed into a coffin, surrounded by darkness, hearing only the heart-rending sobs. Sorrowful as a cuckoo weeping blood, the crowd's fury surged as the commoners clashed with the soldiers. Sun Fu, his back turned to the mob, lashed again and again at the women refusing to board, venting his rage, utterly unaware that only one guard remained by his side. At that moment, Old Man Hu and several villagers tackled a soldier. I leaped over them, a dagger slipping from my sleeve into my palm, and plunged it straight into Sun Fu's nape. With a sickening squelch, blood sprayed across my face. From the corner of my Sun Fu's guard gaped in disbelief, instinctively reaching for his sword, but I'd already yanked the dagger free, kicked off Sun Fu's lower back to flip backward, and roared, "Death to the traitor of the state." The chaos behind me froze for an instant before erupting anew. The soldiers, utterly unprepared for anyone daring to kill an official, stood dumbfounded as villagers wrested away their blades. They dropped to their knees, begging for mercy, hastily clearing a path. Sun Fu lay sprawled on the ground, legs twitching violently like a slaughtered chicken plucked of feathers. The villagers swarmed forward, cut down his guard, and encircled him completely. Gasping his last breaths, he clutched his throat and twisted his head with effort, bulging eyes trembling as he raised a quivering finger. "Rebellion. This is rebellion. Kill him." Old Man Hu let out a loud cry and was the first to bring down his blade. The others quickly followed suit, and thus the dignified fifth rank prefect was hacked into a pulpy mess, mingled with gravel into mud. After what felt like an eternity, a cold wind suddenly swept by, startling the river gulls into hoarse cries. The crowd, staring at Sun Fu, who was undeniably dead, looked up at me in dawning horror, as if waking from a dream. Gripping my dagger tightly, I said in a low voice, "Two choices, either flee south for refuge, or march north with me. If the court won't defend our borders, we will, our nation, will save it ourselves. Most of these villagers were women or white-haired elders, though they knew heading north meant almost certain death. They raised their blades and clubs high, shouting loudly, "North, north!" That night, I led 55 villagers from Huchuan village and 10 defecting soldiers, sailing north by boat. Standing at the bow, I deftly directed the villagers to hoist the sails, cutting through the surging waves as we advanced at full speed. Supported by Xiang, old man who limped over and respectfully cupped his hands toward me, asking, "May I inquire the young master's name?" I chuckled and declared clearly, "Su Yanglan, daughter of Su Changxin from Feng'an, Ting Province." Instead of crossing the river directly, I avoided the barbarian army on the opposite shore and followed the waterways deep into Fan Province to rally my forces. Few knew that I had raised a caravan in Fan Province. Its second in command, Honglang Qi, was my childhood confidant. We hadn't seen each other in 4 or 5 years, relying solely on letters. But after the emperor's southern retreat and the Su family suppression by Prime Minister Zhou, I lost contact with Honglang Qi. 11 years ago, my father brought Honglang Qi to the Su household. His intention was for him to serve as my study companion, someone close in age and earnest, hoping he might coax me into speaking. To my surprise, Honglang Qi was even more reticent than I was and utterly hopeless at academics. After half a month together, all I'd learned from him was how to climb trees silently and pelt my father with fruit from the treetops. Left with no choice, my father borrowed Yuanbai Zhao from the Zhao family, saving us both from devolving into mute monkeys. My father also noticed that Honglang Qi had exceptional bone structure, making him a rare talent in martial arts. So he hired an instructor for him. He calculated that if Honglang could pass the military examinations and secure an official post, the Su family would gain another powerful ally. Unexpectedly, during my coming-of-age ceremony, an old servant of the Su family publicly accused Honglang Qi of stealing my adoptive mother's heirloom, a jade bracelet, right in front of all the guests. My father knew Honglang's character and naturally didn't believe it, but in full view of everyone, the bracelet was indeed found in Honglang's room. To this day, I still remember Honglang's expression at that moment, shocked, bewildered, and helpless. Under the accusing glares of the crowd, he looked desperately at my father and me, stammering for a long time, but failing to explain himself. In the end, he could only clench his fists, his eyes reddening. Bad news travels fast, and his reputation was irreparably tarnished, making an official career impossible. After much deliberation, my father secretly gave him a large sum of silver and ordered him to leave for the north, hoping he could gain experience and return once the scandal faded from memory. When he left, he stubbornly kowtowed 100 times to my father, his forehead bleeding profusely, and no one could pull him up. I didn't see him off because I was busy calculating how to maximize the benefits of his departure. I left him a letter, instructing him to assemble a caravan within 3 years. The North's poverty stemmed from isolation. Goods couldn't be transported. Owning a caravan capable of connecting the northern regions might change many things. Thus, I became the nominal leader of the caravan. When the caravan lacked funds, I provided them. When it needed trade routes, I secured them. Honglang Qi had only one responsibility: to be ruthless and establish a foothold at all costs. Honglang Qi proved himself. Before long, he built the caravan from scratch. Since it competed with officials for profits, he was beaten, threatened, and even imprisoned on false charges. Yet, he ultimately took firm root in the north. This time, the Su family was stripped clean by Prime Minister Zhou, but Honglang Qi's caravan was overlooked. The Prime Minister's reach couldn't extend beyond the river, leaving me this perfect piece to turn the tables. The merchant ship docked near Fan Province, and I disembarked alone. My little black horse was back by my side. Though it had grown leaner from the recent exhaustion, it still snorted spiritedly when I mounted it. As I swung onto the saddle, I thought to myself, I hope my father can send Honglang Qi a dream to make my search easier. As it turned out, I didn't need my father's intervention. Hong Langchi's spies had already been alerted the moment my ship headed toward Fan Province. They blocked several key routes, lying in wait for me, so I was ambushed as soon as I took the mountain path. But I had the caravan's token in my bag. I waved it at them and sneered, "What's the matter? Don't recognize your boss?" The fierce glares in the young men's eyes instantly softened. They scrutinized the token for a long while, confirming it matched the one Hong Langchi held, before reluctantly leading me into the stronghold. Looking at this mountain stronghold with its watchtowers and arrow towers, I thought I'd stumbled into a bandit den. I immediately reined in my horse, cracked my whip, and shouted, "Hong Langchi, get your ass out here." The crowd gasped, their expressions all saying, "Have you lost your mind?" I narrowed my eyes at the door ahead, faintly seeing a head peek out. When our eyes met, the person immediately tripped over his own feet tumbling out, then came running so fast his feet smoked, grinning like a split walnut while shouting repeatedly, "Young mistress." He'd grown much darker and sturdier, his fur coat making him look like a bear in winter. Yet before me, he instinctively hunched his back, his voice pitching higher as he asked nervously, How did you get here?" I choked up momentarily, facing his familiar features. I suddenly felt my nose sting and my voice tremble. "Father's dead, driven to his death." Hong Langchi froze, his face instantly draining of color. His legs gave way as he thudded to his knees, raising a cloud of dust. I looked down at him, my throat clogged with unspoken words. Finally, wiping my face, I spoke slowly and deliberately. "If the officials force the people to rebel, then I shall rebel. Will you join me?" His lips trembled for a long moment before tears suddenly welled up in his eyes. With a nod heavy with grief and hatred, he ground out, "I will." After speaking with him, I learned that half a year ago, when the barbarians first attacked, the local officials had opened the city gates and surrendered. The caravan had been repeatedly plundered by the barbarian army, suffering heavy losses, forcing him to establish a stronghold and bide his time. He knew nothing of the Su family's fate. The Zhou family had kept the news tightly concealed, and he had been too busy fighting for survival to inquire further. Currently, the main force of the barbarians was besieging the northern border army. Months ago, the army had already exhausted its provisions, and General Qinggang was barely holding on with his remaining troops. Prince Everett had attempted multiple rescues without success and had retreated to Cloudhaven City in Yi Province to regroup. Hong Langchi and I agreed to join Prince Everett and rescue the besieged general of the northern border, Qinggang. He was the backbone of the entire north. He could not fall. Hong Langchi's caravan numbered 300 strong. He selected an elite vanguard to lead the way, while I followed by boat with the others. Watching the steeds gallop along the shore, their dragon, spine backs adorned with coin, patterns, silver hooves kicking up mist, I realized Hong Langchi never asked a single question throughout. He remained that same mischievous boy who once took me roof. Hopping, after 7 days, we finally reached our destination. Along the journey, we passed 3 villages reduced to ghost towns. The barbarians had pillaged and slaughtered, leaving mountains of corpses and fields of starved bodies. Survivors were few, and we could only save whom we chanced upon. Gazing ahead, Prince Everett's banners fluttered atop Cloudhaven City's walls, where a line of defenders stood visible. The city bore scars of fierce battles. The wind reeked of blood and decay. The ground outside littered with broken arrows and blades. The wall's base smeared crimson as if painted. I signaled the group to hold their positions and rode alone to the city gates, calling out, "Descendant of the Su family of Feng'an requests audience with His Highness Prince Everett. Kindly announce our arrival." Moments later, the city gates creaked open a sliver, and a young man rode out on horseback. After surveying me from a distance, he asked, "I am Qing Pei, an advisor to His Highness. Do you have any token from the Su family?" I rolled up my sleeve, revealing the goose tattoo on my forearm. This goose tattoo is my proof. This tattoo was identical to the one on my father's arm. Our little secret. In his early years, My father often encountered bandits while trading in the north, so he went to great lengths to forge connections with both lawful and underworld factions, tattooing a goose on his arm as a token of identity. I accidentally discovered this and, in a burst of excitement, got the same tattoo to show him. The poor man nearly fainted from anger, and it took half a day of coaxing before he resigned himself to the fact that his daughter had indeed grown up wild, inheriting his roguish ways. As I expected, Qing Pei clearly recognized the tattoo and was overjoyed. He swung the gates wide open and ushered us inside. Though Cloudhaven City appeared desolate, makeshift porridge stations lined the streets, where civilians queued in orderly fashion for a bowl of thin gruel paired with a handful of leaves, just enough to stave off starvation. Each carried homemade wooden spears and pikes, ready for battle at any moment. Qing Pei wasted no time, leading me and Hongling Qi into a civilian residence to meet Prince Everett. My heart was uneasy. To me, history books were too long, filled with absurd tales of dynasties rising and falling. Nobility treating commoners as expendable was the norm. I truly couldn't guess how far this legendary rebel prince would go for the people. Moments later, I finally laid eyes on Prince Everett. He was much younger than I'd imagined, with sharp brows and bright eyes, every bit the noble bearing of royalty. Yet his sleeves bore large patches, his boots were caked in mud, and his head was wrapped in bandages, a rather disheveled sight. Upon seeing me, he asked with slight unease, "Is your father well?" Instead, I countered, "Your Highness, why haven't you fled?" He answered without hesitation, "I was entrusted by the people. It is my duty to protect them." I studied him silently. His gaze was forthright, carrying far more righteous defiance than the typical nobility. In that moment, the doubts lodged in my heart vanished. I should have known. My father wouldn't have taken this job unless he'd weighed the scales carefully. So I bowed solemnly to him. My father is gone. Though fallen, he died without regret. Su Yonglan of the Su family pledges to join your highness in striving for survival and revival. Yet I never expected a dignified prince to be such a crier. Ever since learning of my father's passing, he had been weeping nonstop, his lips trembling as tears streamed down his face, soaking his robes in endless rivulets. But tears aside, he wasted no time in action. After mustering the troops, he resolved to march immediately to Jinwen City to rescue General of the northern border Qinggong. The barbarian forces besieging the general numbered 30,000 strong. This battle was akin to throwing eggs against stones. Yet Prince Everett dared not delay further, for the northern border army had dwindled to fewer than 1,000 men, utterly incapable of withstanding the enemy's next assault. To make matters worse, Jinwen City housed many civilians, most of them children. We couldn't simply stand by. In the end, the prince ordered his lieutenant to feign an attack from the east, while he personally led 1,000 cavalry westward in a flanking maneuver to aid the northern border army's breakout. My task was to steer the merchant ships to the riverbank 10 miles from Jinwen City, leading the caravan to receive the wounded soldiers and civilians. This divided retreat would significantly reduce casualties. This was my first time on the battlefield, and I couldn't help feeling nervous. Hunched over my horse's back, I gripped my spear tightly. Hongling Qi deliberately blocked my path, pacing back and forth ahead of me, his gaze darkening as he watched the distant army fade from view. The barbarian forces had truly taken the bait, lured eastward, allowing Prince Everett's elite troops to enter the city unopposed. Moments later, Prince Everett's banners reappeared on the horizon. They had formed a protective ring around the civilians, swiftly advancing toward the riverbank. Just as I began to relax, a sudden tremor shook the ground beneath me, rumbling like an earthquake. Instinctively, I looked up, only to see the sky darken as a dense cloud of arrows rained down upon us. "Prepare for battle." Honglang Qi roared furiously and swung his blade to meet the enemy. Yet the opposing forces closed in within moments. These barbarians, each mounted on towering steeds, surged forth like a raging tempest, effortlessly scattering our ranks. Dazed and disoriented, I could only focus on shielding the fleeing civilians. War horses neighed as soldiers formed human walls to block the enemy's cavalry. One after another, they fell, their blood mingling with dust and splattering across my face. Suddenly, an arrow shot straight toward me, piercing my shoulder. The searing pain nearly made me lose grip of the reins. Clenching my teeth, I steadied myself and charged into the crowd to rescue the unarmed civilians. Children screamed helplessly, covering their heads as they ran, fragile as leaves caught in the whirlwind of hooves. Torn apart, with all my strength, I grabbed 2 children and flung them toward the caravan brothers. In my periphery, a woman clutching her infant collapsed, only for a horse's hoof to crush her spine with a sickening crack. She vomited blood profusely, dragging a long trail of blood as she desperately crawled toward me, using her last ounce of strength to lift the infant. I frantically grabbed the tiny swaddle bundle and clutched it to my chest, reaching out to pull her up. But her hand suddenly fell limp, and her body was soon trampled beneath the horse's hooves, torn apart and reduced to mud. Yang Lan, run! Hong Lang Chi's voice came from behind me, gritting my teeth. I swung my spear and knocked an enemy soldier off his horse, then followed the bloody path carved by our troops to escort the civilians toward the riverbank. Women and children were prioritized for boarding the boats, and Prince Everett was also shielded by his subordinates at the cost of their lives until they reached the river. Yet he refused to board, crying out hoarsely, "Changming, Changming." Changming was the courtesy name of the general of the northern border. Stunned, I turned and finally saw a towering figure amidst the enemy horde, wielding a crescent moon blade with overwhelming force, cutting through the battlefield. It was Qin Geng, the general of the northern border. The enemy forces were clearly targeting him, encircling him like wolves layer upon layer until escape was impossible, pierced by multiple arrows. His silver armor stained with blood, his roar pierced through the endless yellow sand. Deafening, save the nation, an arrow flew straight into Prince Everett's steed. As he crashed to the ground, I instinctively lunged forward to shield him, only for a dark shadow to press down. Warm fur enveloped me as Hong Lang Chi threw himself over me, his blood dripping onto my face. 2 arrows protruded from his back. His crimson eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, brimming with unspoken words before he swallowed them back. Leaping ashore again, he bellowed, "Protect the prince, protect the young mistress." I watched helplessly as the severely wounded Hong Lang Chi and the remaining soldiers drew the enemy away, fighting while retreating. Gritting my teeth, I pushed Prince Everett onto the merchant ship. The battlefield was littered with corpses. The small merchant vessel became the people's last hope. Clinging to the ship's edge, I screamed, "Set sail." After that cry, darkness swallowed me whole, dragging me into an abyss of oblivion. I had a long dream. In the dream, I reverted to my 6 or 7-year-old self. Outside, a spring drizzle fell as my father and I sat beneath the eaves of the Sioux family's ancestral home, watching the rain. He was still in his 40s then, with temples lightly frosted, gazing pensively at the endless rain as he held me and spoke of my mother, whom I'd never met. My father said she was the illegitimate daughter of an official's family. Born to a lowly concubine, she endured harsh treatment from childhood, plagued by chronic illness, until she was finally married off to a merchant like him. Yet she never abandoned herself to despair, striving wholeheartedly to live well. When my father recounted the towering mountains and endless snowy plains he'd seen on his trade routes, she couldn't hide her yearning, saying she traversed those magnificent landscapes too, once she grew stronger. But she died in the bloom of youth. A mere cold snatched her away effortlessly. In the end, she never escaped the rigid confines of those deep courtyard walls. My father paused, his eyes burning intently as he looked at me. When a person is trapped, they die. When a nation is trapped, it perishes. My child, you must break free. Even if one day you marry, don't let yourself be confined to the inner chambers of your husband's household. I'll save up piles of silver for you, to be your foundation. I curled up in his embrace, clinging greedily to his calloused hands as he made his solemn vow with pious devotion. May all the gods and Buddhas and the ancestors of the Sioux family bless my child to ride the winds and waves with a future smooth and bright. I looked up, startled to find his face growing indistinct, and cried out urgently, "What about you? And you, Father?" His figure dissolved at last, along with the familiar old house, leaving only wind, rain, and gathering gloom. I woke with a start from the dream, my cheeks half drenched with tears. Looking around, I realized I must have been brought back to Cloud Haven City. My wounds had been treated, thick layers of bandages wrapped around them. Outside, chaos reigned. Someone seemed to be weeping. I rose, threw on my clothes, and stumbled groggily out the door. A large crowd had gathered outside the door. Wounded soldiers stood in a dejected line, while Prince Everett lay sprawled on the ground. His injuries weren't severe, yet Ching Pei and several attendants couldn't lift him up, left helplessly staring in frustration. As I approached, I saw him pounding his chest, his voice hoarse as if his throat were being strangled, murmuring brokenly, "Changming, Changming, Changming." Ching Pei told me with grief and indignation that the general of the northern border had died in battle. The enemy had beheaded him and then tied his corpse to a horse to drag it away. As our boats sailed down the river, the barbarians chased along the shore, dragging the general's body behind them in provocation. Prince Everett witnessed it all and, overcome with anguish, vomited blood. When he came to, he seemed to have lost his mind, rolling on the ground like a child, tearing at his clothes and wailing, covered in dirt. I stood silently for a moment before walking to his side. Kneeling down, I said softly, "Your Highness, the general entrusted both the nation and its people to you." Prince Everett stared at me in shock, his chest heaving as he gasped for breath. After a long pause, he finally staggered to his feet, clutching Ching Pei's arm for support, and rasped out an order. "Break camp immediately and escort the civilians to Fu Province at full speed." This battle had ended in utter defeat for us. The general of the northern border had fallen in combat. Hong Langchi was missing, and the bodies of countless soldiers lay scattered for miles. Unrecognizable, the barbarian army advanced with terrifying momentum, seizing 2 more cities. We retreated eastward until we barely managed to hold Fu Province. Since childhood, I'd known war was cruel, but only now, witnessing it firsthand, did I understand the true meaning of devastation, so vast that neither heaven nor earth would answer your cries. Prince Everett's forces had dwindled to just over 10,000 troops, no longer capable of facing the enemy head-on. Supplies were nearly exhausted, and the prolonged siege had triggered famine across Fu Province. Half its citizens fled the city, only to be slaughtered by the barbarians encircling its outskirts. A row of wooden poles stood erected along the riverbank, each topped with a severed head. The barbarians lit bonfires beneath them, roasting plunder livestock while pounding human skin drums in rhythmic triumph, dancing their victory dance to celebrate the death of the general of the northern border. Trapped within the city, with no escape or retreat, we were like meat on a chopping block. Prince Everett sat cross-legged before me, muttering to himself in a daze for a long while before suddenly lifting his head to ask, "Can we still fight?" I didn't answer, turning my gaze away instead. Among the civilians who had fled Jinwen City were over 70 children, the oldest no more than 12 or 13. Their parents had starved to death, leaving them their last scraps of food. Now, these children approached cautiously, clutching small bags of grain, kneeling before Prince Everett with clear voices. "Your Highness, we offer you this food. We wish to join the army too." Prince Everett froze, then suddenly slapped himself hard across the face. Ching Pei swiftly caught his wrist. "Don't frighten the children." I stood up and led my horse away. "Give me some time. I'll go get money and provisions." He frantically grabbed me. "You're the only one left of the Sioux family." I remained calm, precisely why I must go. My father is dead, but I'm still alive. The Sioux family hasn't fallen apart. His connections still span the entire country. If I can persuade them to donate provisions, silver, even ships, this war can still be fought. I led my black horse to the city gate. By chance, I saw old man who's stopping a surviving Northern Border Army soldier and asking eagerly, "Son, my boy's name is Hudachuan, from Huchuan village. Have you seen him?" The soldier shook his head, indicating he hadn't. Old man who persisted, asking others, 7 or 8 in a row, but all said they didn't know. He stood there dejected, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, then looked up at me and grinned. "It's fine. Not seeing him means he's still alive." I lower my head, unable to offer comfort. Deep down, we both knew only a few hundred of the 50,000 Northern Border Army had survived. Not knowing, not seeing, meant they were dead. To history books, the death of an ordinary commoner is but a speck of dust, unworthy even of leaving a name. But to their parents and loved ones, it is a weighty grave, one they mourn and long for, burying their own hearts within. I reached into my robe and touched the caravan token. I asked myself, will we win? I couldn't answer, but I still held one last bargaining chip in my hand. My own life. To stake my life in this gamble. My father could do it, and so could I. It's almost laughable. Back then, I couldn't wait to leave the South. Yet now I've spent half my life crossing the river to return. The barbarians controlled all major routes. But fortunately, I had traveled north and south with my father in my youth and knew a small path unmarked on any map. I rode across the river myself. First, I sought out a few old comrades of the Sioux family and had them help me connect with major merchant clans. Seeking alliances, most merchants hesitated, fearing they'd meet the same fate as theZus. But under the tyranny of the imperial court's exorbitant taxes, some realized guilt or innocence was just a whim of the court. There was no escaping it. Soon, 3 wealthy merchants approached me of their own accord. We arranged to meet at Cloudsword Temple to discuss important matters. We chose Cloudsword Temple for 2 reasons. First, Taoist Clearwind, the temple's abbot, had personally invited us, wishing to contribute to saving the nation. Second, the emperor revered Taoism and had recently been obsessed with seeking immortality and elixirs. So officials generally dared not trouble Taoist temples. Disguised as a pilgrim, I slipped into Cloudsword Temple early. The merchants arrived as promised, and Taoist Clearwind reserved the most secluded room for us, using meditation as a pretext to clear out all unrelated visitors. These merchants were all old business partners of my father's, men I respectfully addressed as uncles. Once seated, I bluntly recounted what I had witnessed in the north. Both soldiers and civilians were willing to fight to the death. Yet His Majesty surrendered first. But when the nest is overturned, no egg remains unbroken. The barbarians are insatiable. Once the North falls completely, the South will become their next prize. The South is mostly plains. How can we resist the enemy's cavalry? Should we pin our hopes on a drunken, deluded emperor suddenly seeing reason? Absurd. Our lives must be held in our own hands. Since death comes whether we resist or submit, I choose to be the one wielding the blade. The 3 elder merchants fell into prolonged silence. Finally, the eldest among them slammed the table decisively. "You're right. Though the emperor is a scoundrel, this is our nation. Death is but a moment's pain. We cannot let future generations grovel before barbarians." The other 2 voiced their agreement, pledging to contribute funds and manpower, and proposed forming a merchant association to unite like-minded individuals in common cause. Thus was born the United River Society. Just as the discussion reached its peak, Taoist Clearwind rushed in urgently, whispering through the door crack, "Imperial troops have surrounded the temple. Do not open the door. I'll handle them." The group panicked. I quickly signaled them to hide in the inner chamber, then braced the door and strained to listen to the commotion outside. The clamor of footsteps revealed a sizable contingent of soldiers. Our whereabouts had clearly been exposed. Suddenly, a familiar voice rang out. "Forgive our intrusion, Master Taoist. We act under the Prime Minister's orders to apprehend rebels. We beg your cooperation." My heart skipped a beat as I peered through the door crack. To my shock, the visitor was none other than Yuan Baizhao. Yuan Baizhao had since been promoted to Fengjilang, and his speech was now thick with bureaucratic airs as he insisted on searching the Taoist temple. Taoist Clearwind said sternly, "This is a sacred Taoist sanctuary, housing the 3 Pure One statues bestowed by His Majesty. Without the Emperor's decree, none shall trespass." Yuan Baizhao snorted, "Such bold words. Master Taoist, do you dare disregard the Prime Minister?" Taoist Clearwind scoffed. "What? Is the Prime Minister above the Emperor now?" Yuan Baizhao choked on his words, his face darkening as he barked. "Master Taoist obstructs us so fiercely. Could it be you have something to hide?" With a wave of his hand, he commanded, "Move, search the place." But Taoist Clearwind had prepared a counter. He raised high a golden token. "By the Emperor's decree, this golden edict is here. How dare you act so recklessly?" The Emperor had issued hundreds of such tokens, granting one to every notable Taoist temple, hardly a rarity. Yet, anything bearing the imperial seal could always intimidate. The soldiers hesitated and halted their advance. Yuan Baizhao pointed at Taoist Clearwind's nose and roared threateningly, "Old Taoist, do you think I dare not kill you? It's utterly foolish to risk injury for a few strangers." Taoist Clearwind stood unshaken, flicked his horsetail whisk, cleared his throat, and shouted skyward, "Thunder deity." Yuan Baizhao flew into a rage, snatched a soldier's longsword, and pressed it against Taoist Clearwind's neck, frantically clawing at the door crack. I gripped my dagger, ready to fight to the death. But suddenly, the situation took a turn. Another group stormed into the courtyard. At their head was a woman who immediately confronted Yuan Baizhao. "Yuan Baizhao, have you lost your mind? Daring to wield my father's banner for slaughter. Aren't you afraid of the Emperor's wrath?" Yuan Baizhao's arrogance instantly deflated. Stammering, he said, "Li Shu, how did you get here?" The woman was none other than Lily Zhou, the 4th daughter of the Prime Minister's mansion, who had just become engaged to him. Far fiercer than the rumors suggested, she shouted loudly, "The Emperor holds Taoist disciples in high esteem. If someone dies today, you can kiss your head goodbye. Don't even think of dragging the Prime Minister's mansion into this." Lily Zhou stormed off with a flick of her sleeve. Yuan Baizhao glared resentfully at the door for a moment before finally tossing his blade aside and chasing after her. The soldiers scattered in disarray, their footsteps fading into the distance. I quickly cracked the door open and ushered Taoist Clearwind inside. Taoist Clearwind was actually terrified out of his wits. After gulping down half a pot of tea to steady himself, he immediately cursed. "You little brat, got a dog's nose or what? How'd you sniff us out here? Pah!" Then he shoved the imperial gold token into my hand and whispered, "This is pure gold. Melt it down, worth a fortune." And so, we narrowly escaped disaster. After agreeing on signals and contact methods, we hastily dispersed. After laying low for a few days, we were certain Zhao Li Bai hadn't accurately identified who exactly the so-called rebels were. His frantic, aimless searches through the streets had stirred public resentment, leading to censure from court officials and forcing him to back down. I began executing our plan. Soon, through coordinated efforts, the United River Society gathered its first batch of provisions, loaded onto 3 merchant ships disguised within a larger fleet heading north. I accompanied the shipment, constantly altering the routes of these 3 vessels to evade the barbarian spies. A month later, we finally arrived in Fu Province. By then, tens of thousands had already perished in Fu Province's famine. Only 1 or 2 households out of 10 remained alive in some areas, with certain towns resorting to trading children for food, descending into a living hell. Yet the barbarians still couldn't conquer Fu Province. The soldiers survived on roots, tree bark, even the cotton stuffing from their clothes, stubbornly holding back the enemy's cavalry. Our grain shipment became a lifeline. Upon receiving the news, Prince Everett urgently dispatched men to meet us. Standing at the bow, I spotted many familiar faces among the crowd ashore. The caravan brothers, Old Man Hu, and the fishermen from Huchuan village, all eagerly awaiting the merchant ships. The 3 merchant ships slowly navigated single file through the narrow valley as the people waved excitedly. But suddenly, the scent of tung oil drifted on the wind, and a dark swarm of barbarians surged from the mountainside, unleashing wave after wave of flaming arrows that blotted out the sky. The ships were instantly engulfed in flames. Cheers turned to desperate screams. The captains of the 2 merchant ships behind me panicked, attempting to turn and evade, only to collide and begin listing dangerously. Bracing against the mast, I roared, "Steady, make for shore, dump the grain." The caravan crew desperately hurled sacks of grain toward the riverbank. Civilians and soldiers leaped into the water, frantically grabbing the sacks to swim back. The raging current tossed both people and grain sacks up and down. Starvation had left them too weak to drag the heavy sacks, yet they refused to let go. The 2nd merchant ship, severely damaged, ultimately sank. The crew abandoned ship on makeshift rafts to save themselves, forcing me to also flee ashore and direct the retreat. Yet people kept charging into the water for grain. I saw Old who steering his raft toward the burning ship and shouted urgently, "Don't go! Leave it! Leave it!" But they wouldn't heed my cries. A white-haired ant collapsed over a grain sack, half drowned and unconscious, still murmuring, "Grain, grain, child, mother has grain now." Old Who and the fishermen ultimately boarded the burning ship and managed to throw grain onto their rafts. These seasoned ferrymen, who had spent years on the river, summoned strength from somewhere unknown, making repeated trips with sacks of grain. They braved the sea of flames and the hail of arrows. What piled upon their rafts were lives, the sliver of hope to survive alongside their loved ones. The distant thunder of hooves signaled the arrival of reinforcements, clashing fiercely with the barbarians intent on encircling us. I tossed a sack of grain onto a horse's back and turned to gaze at the river, only to spot Old Who once again steering his raft toward the river's heart. Arrows shrieked through the air. The merchant ship's mast snapped abruptly, and billowing black smoke, scorching the heavens and searing the earth, swallowed his figure without effort. This time, the raft did not return to shore. At the cost of heavy casualties, we salvaged most of the provisions and delivered them into the hands of our soldiers. Old Whose body was recovered the next day, wrapped in a straw mat. It was temporarily laid to rest near the city gates. We couldn't bear to tell Xiang, but she guessed the truth anyway. Following the sound of weeping, she stumbled toward the city gate, kneeling to feel the hands of each corpse until she found Old Who. Trembling, she rubbed the calluses on his fingers, then took a pair of new straw sandals from her robe and slowly slipped them onto his bare feet. I stood behind her, my throat tight, sensing my presence. She said softly, "Chief, my brother and my father, they were both brave." She bent down, pressing herself against Old Whose body as tears streamed from her sightless eyes. "I won't be a coward either. Father, I'll live well, I promise." At dusk that day, I and a group of townsfolk bowed farewell to the dead, kowtowing 3 times. When I turned, I saw the people behind me, men and women, young and old, all gripping makeshift spears, even children clutching short javelins. Their clothes were tattered, but their eyes shone bright, burning with hatred and hope like the midday sun. No one knew when the war would end, yet they had all chosen, without a word, to keep fighting. It suddenly dawned on me, with people like this, we could not lose. As I had anticipated, these blood-stained provisions saved countless lives and ignited a blazing fury in the hearts of our soldiers. Not long after, Prince Everett led a surprise attack, reclaiming a city and seizing vast stores of provisions and horses. This long-awaited victory was like a hoe breaking through frozen soil, breathing life back into the northern lands. Militia forces sprang up across the region, flocking to Prince Everett's banner in eager waves. The spineless corrupt officials, who had willingly served the barbarians, were thrown into panic, hastily dispatching troops to suppress the uprising. But the people feared no death. How could they be cowed by it? One after another, men like Sun Fu fell beneath a storm of blades, while commoners straightened their backs, shouting their refusal to be slaves of a fallen nation. Rising in rebellion, the scales began to tip. The people seized several river crossings, allowing me to continue shuttling between the northern and southern banks, traveling tirelessly from town to town. More and more merchants joined the United River Society. On mountain paths, often seen were modest traders pushing carts in haste, delivering provisions saved from their meager meals to the front lines, silently covering for one another. Some even donated the bulk of their wealth, gambling on an uncertain future. I also ordered the compilation of the people's heroic resistance against foreign invaders into pamphlets, widely distributed across the South. The method proved highly effective, inspiring numerous scholars and scions of noble families to deliver impassioned speeches, denouncing the emperor's corruption and incompetence, and advocating a decisive battle against the barbarians. The court was in turmoil. The emperor, furious, raged indiscriminately, branding all ministers who spoke well of Prince Everett as rebels, confiscating their properties, and exiling them. He ordered a thorough investigation to uncover who was spreading these seditious rumors. Assigned to this task was none other than the currently triumphant Yuan Baizhao. Yuan Baizhao's rise had been meteoric. By clinging to Prime Minister Zhou's coattails, he had ascended to the position of Deputy Minister of Rights. Whether he was settling personal scores or had genuinely uncovered concrete evidence, I couldn't tell. In any case, the first thing that wretched dog did upon receiving the decree was to issue a warrant for my arrest. As luck would have it, I was in a small southern town. Within days, wanted posters bearing my likeness plastered every street. City guards compared passers-by to my portrait, while patrols stopped people at random. They seemed determined to dig 3 feet underground if it meant finding me. I had no choice but to hole up in an inn, cursing inwardly. If only the court showed this much zeal against the barbarians. Naturally, I wasn't about to wait for capture. Earlier, I bribed the city guards and arranged an escape route, planning to slip out at the hour of high tonight. As the appointed time drew near, I pushed open the rear window to survey the street. Quiet, with no signs of trouble. Adjusting my bundle, I was about to open the door when heavy official boots thudded outside. Moments later, a dark figure appeared beyond the threshold. After standing silently, he suddenly sighed. "Yanglan, I know you're here. Open the door. I'd rather not disturb the townsfolk." It was that tenacious bastard Yuan Baizhao. Just as I feared, his words were clearly a threat. Given his vindictive nature, if I refused to open the door today, there was no telling what depraved acts he might commit. I listened carefully. He had brought men, but not many. Steadying myself, I whispered, "Yuan Baizhao, I want to speak with you alone. Come in by yourself. Otherwise, you'll be taking back a corpse. Let's see how you explain that." Since Yuan Baizhao had come personally, it was clear he wanted me alive. If I died here, how could he use me to catch bigger fish? My guess was right. Yuan Baizhao hesitated for a long moment before finally agreeing. Pressing the dagger to my neck, I slowly pushed the door open. He scanned the room, confirming the tiny guest chamber couldn't hide anyone, then eagerly slipped inside, confidently closing the door behind him. Outside, the shadows of guards shifted restlessly. Yuan Baizhao and I stood face to face in the room, silent for a long while. Over a decade of friendship, childhood companions with no secrets between us, now reduced to bitter enemies. How lamentable. At last, Yuan Baizhao spoke. "Yanglan, why must you be so disobedient?" This line sounds all too familiar. I'm sick of hearing it. Yuan Baizhao always loved playing the mentor, once forcing me to memorize books like Admonitions for Women. I tore the book up, and he looked at me with disappointment, saying I was disobedient and would be mocked by noble ladies someday. Back then, I just thought he was pedantic. Now I see. He simply relished the feeling of controlling others. Watching his pained, regretful expression, I finally asked the question that weighed most on my mind. "Yuan Baizhao, those letters, they were forged by you, weren't they?" I knew Yuan Baizhao's father well. He was always meticulous. He'd never leave behind incriminating letters that could implicate the entire family. Besides, merchants keep 2 sets of books, one open, one hidden. Unless someone informed on him, There's no way the investigation would have uncovered everything so thoroughly. And the informant had to be someone with access to the Zhao family's hidden accounts. Yuan Bai Zhao, as the eldest legitimate son, was the most likely suspect. Yuan Bai Zhao's eyes darkened slightly, a mocking smile curling his lips. Yanglan, women who are too clever never meet a good end. So it really was him. Baffled, I pressed further. But they were your own parents. How could you bear to? He suddenly burst into laughter, a piercing sound that sent chills down my spine. Then, abruptly lowering his voice, he whispered to me, "Of course it's because I'm not their real son." My scalp tingled as realization struck. "You're the son of the Marquis of Dingxiang?" Yuan Bai Zhao exhaled in relief, words tumbling out like scattered beans. "That's right. The Marquis of Dingxiang is actually my birth father. Back then, Nanny's son couldn't conceive, so she bribed the midwife at the Marquis's household to steal me. I was supposed to be the eldest son of the Marquis, yet I ended up as a merchant's child. Shouldn't I hate this? Nanny's son was the matriarch of the Zhao family. She raised Yuan Bai Zhao for over 20 years, yet she didn't even deserve to be called mother by him." Confused, I hastily interrupted. "You're saying an ordinary merchant family could steal the son of a marquis? Is that even possible?" His face flushed with sudden agitation. "What do you know? Su Yanglan, do you have any idea what my life has been like?" "You don't." Of course I didn't know. In my impression, the Zhao family had never mistreated Yuan Bai Zhao. He received the finest food, clothing, and education, with renowned scholars hired to teach him. There was nothing they owed him. Yet he acted as if grievously wronged, his eyes bloodshot, his voice rising with each word. "Before my third brother was born, everything in the Zhao family was mine. I disciplined myself, becoming the widely praised eldest son of the main branch. But then Nanny's son recovered from her illness and bore my third brother. Her heart turned biased. She actually wanted him to share authority with me. Why should he? What if he's a prodigy? Scholars, farmers, artisans, merchants. Merchants are the lowest, without a noble family background. Even after over a decade of grueling study, I barely scraped by as a petty ninth rank official. Meanwhile, those born into privilege crush me effortlessly beneath their feet. It's unfair. Do you know how they mocked me? They called me a short-sighted, ignorant country bumpkin. At banquets, they humiliated me publicly, leaving me unable to hold my head high. He flung his arms wide in exaggerated frenzy, roaring like a madman. "I've had enough. I will climb higher. I will gain rank and fortune. I will set everything right and reclaim my place as the noble heir of a marquis's house." The candlelight flickered, casting Yuan Bai Zhao's twisted, greed-filled face in a ghastly shadow on the wall. Like a vengeful spirit, I staggered backward step by step in shock, finally pressing against the window, and rasped, "You're so selfish." He seized my shoulders with a vice-like grip, his eyes burning with an incomprehensible desire. "So what if I'm selfish? Is selfishness such a crime? Yanglan, you shouldn't be like this. You should support me. Since childhood, only you have ever been truly kind to me. Only you. You can't abandon me." I lowered my gaze, raised my arms, and hugged him tightly, then kicked hard at his knees, using the momentum to drag us both out the window, plunging with a splash into the lake below. Our dynasty has two utterly useless fools. One is the emperor, and the other is Yuan Bai Zhao, who can trip over the same spot 3 times. The lake water was icy cold. Zhao Yuanbai sank the moment he hit the surface, panically grabbing my arm to resurface, only for me to push his head back under repeatedly until he gulped enough water to float belly up like a bloated toad. Since childhood, everyone praised Zhao Yuanbai's intelligence. Only I knew how foolish he truly was. Too arrogant to reflect, he'd blame others for his recurring mistakes. Underestimating me, or rather, underestimating women, became the gravest error of his life. Had he used his brain, he'd have realized my ability to traverse war-torn regions meant I'd establish safe houses along the route. His arrival merely preceded my prearranged escape. I'd specifically chosen this lakeside, and so, when Zhao inevitably came, I could reenact my vanishing act. Our splashing would draw his guards soon, but my caravan allies were already in position. Several caravan brothers fished us out swiftly, where a prepared carriage waited ashore. I stuffed Yuan Bai Zhao into the hidden compartment under the carriage seat. He was quite a large fellow and didn't fit easily, so I simply dislocated his arms and tied him up tightly. Then I boarded the carriage and left the place without a care. We passed right by Yuan Bai Zhao's guards. The carriage sped along and eventually arrived at the ferry. Yuan Bai Zhao, that oversized waist, had been reduced to a small parcel and was successfully smuggled onto the merchant ship by me. By the time he woke up, we were already drifting on the river. I tied Yuan Bai Zhao to a chair, removed the rag from his mouth, and pulled up another chair to sit facing him. Tears of pain welled in his eyes from his dislocated arms, and he shouted furiously, "Yang Lan Su, the Marquis's household will never let you get away with this." When I ignored him, he switched to a pitiful tone, pleading, "Yang Lan, I never meant to harm Uncle Su. I really didn't. It was an accident. I never thought the Su family would actually." I cut him off. "Does the Marquis of Dingxiang truly value you? You're just some stray they picked up halfway. How could you compare to the carefully groomed young masters of the household?" Yuan Bai Zhao said urgently, "The legitimate son of the Marquis of Dingxiang spends his days in brothels, ruining his health, leaving him with useless heirs. One of his bastard sons is utterly incompetent, while the other was caught in an affair with a concubine and driven out. He has only me left." He paused, noticing the unmistakable mockery on my face. Momentarily bewildered, I struggled to suppress a smirk and played along. "Indeed, you're the only barely presentable son he has left. Otherwise, he wouldn't have acknowledged you, would he?" Yuan Bai Zhao instantly turned pale. Just then, a caravan brother entered the cabin and whispered to me, "Boss, why are you keeping him around? Just off him and toss him into the river." I mimicked my father's mannerism, stroking the non-existent beard on my chin, and said, "Killing him would be such a waste. The Marquis's household has money. Let them pay for his ransom. Isn't he a noble son of the Marquis? I'd like to see just how noble he is." Yuan Bai Zhao wasn't lying. He really was quite valuable. I scratched my head as I wrote a letter to the Marquis of Dingxiang, demanding 10,000 bushels of grain, and including Yuan Bai Zhao's personal jade pendant as proof. Through our network of brothers, it eventually made its way to the Marquis's estate. At first, I worried the price was too high, but soon enough, the Marquis of Dingxiang gathered the full ransom. Of course, he wasn't entirely honest. He begged the court to send troops, planning to ambush us when we came to collect the grain. However, the north was no longer what it used to be. The militia guarded the only pass, catching them off guard, seizing the grain, and fleeing. The Marquis lost both his grain and his soldiers, forced to swallow his bitterness in silence. I slapped my thigh in regret. Had I known the Marquis's estate was so rich, I should have squeezed him for all he was worth. I quickly spread word again, demanding 30,000 dan of grain from the Marquis's estate. Sadly, this time, there was no response. I could only sympathetically inform Yuan Bai Zhao. "Ha, your dear father doesn't want you anymore." I tossed Yuan Bai Zhao into the mountain stronghold Honglingqi had built. Xiang and a group of children and wounded soldiers had also retreated here. The stronghold's terrain was well chosen, easy to defend, hard to attack. Here, they stitched cloth armor, made straw sandals, and tended to the wounded, stubbornly growing like resilient bamboo in their tender years, strong enough to shelter others from the storm. Only Yuan Bai Zhao was left to rot alone. Upon learning that the Marquis of Dingxiang had abandoned efforts to rescue him, he begged me desperately, "Write to the Prime Minister's mansion. I'm Lily Zhou's husband. She must save me." I wrote, hoping to extort more money from the Prime Minister's mansion, but after waiting for a long time, my informant told me that Prime Minister Zhou had already declared Yuan Bai Zhao a martyr for the nation, even setting up a funeral hall for him. As for Lily Zhou, she managed to send me a banknote, 1,000 taels of silver, not to ransom Yuan Bai Zhao, but to beg me to kill him. It made sense. Who could tolerate sharing a bed with such a shameless, unprincipled scoundrel? When Yuan Bai Zhao learned of this, his face twisted in disbelief. How could this be? If I die, she'll be widowed. A pampered noble woman like her wouldn't survive on her own. I couldn't be bothered to argue with him further, simply instructing his guards to reduce his rations, just enough to keep him from starving, since he looked down on commoners. He didn't deserve to eat the grain grown by tenant farmers. As I turned to leave, Yuan Bai Zhao suddenly sneered with a sinister chill. You can't win. The barbarians have 100,000 fierce warriors. What hope does your ragtag mob have? I understood then that Yuan Bai Zhao still clung to his dying delusion of dragging someone down with him, but he was doomed to disappointment. In early spring the following year, Prince Everett led the militia in a fierce assault on Chongzhou, slaughtering tens of thousands of enemies, seizing vast quantities of horses and provisions, and capturing the barbarian general alive. This battle crippled the barbarian strength, forcing them into steady retreat. Our army pressed the advantage, reclaiming 7 cities and cutting off the enemy's supply routes. The emperor, who had watched from the sidelines until now, finally realized that if this continued, the people would recognize only Prince Everett, not their rightful sovereign. In haste, he issued a proclamation sending troops as reinforcements, pretending his earlier decree of divided rule had never existed. The barbarians, furious and exasperated, dispatched several troops to harass the people and plunder their provisions. Little did they expect a guerrilla force to descend like a bolt from the blue, moving like ghosts through the mountains and fields, repeatedly ambushing the barbarian supply lines and striking down their generals. Soon after, similar guerrilla units sprang up like mushrooms after rain, leveraging their intimate knowledge of the terrain. They often inflicted heavy losses on the enemy without losing a single soldier, leaving the barbarians utterly confounded. Looking across the north, every citizen had become a soldier, turning the tide of war with an unstoppable, overwhelming force. I arrived in Chongzhou, newly liberated, and stood atop a high mountain, gazing down at the land below. It was here in Chongzhou that my father had found and taken me in all those years ago. Chongzhou was a land of low-lying fields, fertile for growing bountiful rice, yet also prone to floods that could turn its marshes into mass graves. 13 years ago, relentless torrential rains had breached the riverbanks, wiping a dozen villages off the map in an instant. I was only 4 years old then, yet I still remember the taste of muddy floodwater filling my mouth. My birth parents placed me in a wooden basin, balancing it on their heads as we were swept out of our home by the raging currents. I wailed loudly, clutching their fingers, gripping the basin's edge, struggling to survive. Mother let go first. Her body was caught by a tangle of branches, bloated like a water-filled sack, hanging face down before vanishing from sight in an instant. The wooden basin got stuck among a pile of jagged rocks. I desperately pulled at my father's hand, but only managed to grasp a single finger. His body had already been torn apart by the rocks, leaving only this waterlogged, pale finger behind. I stopped crying. Clutching that finger, I sat dazed in the basin. After what felt like an eternity, the torrential rain eased, and a faint light broke through the murky sky. In the distance, a figure approached by boat, plunging into the water with a splash before hauling me aboard. My rescuer was Su Chongxin, a merchant. He carried me back, buried my father's finger, and erected memorial graves for my mother and the other villagers whose names would never be remembered. Perhaps floodwaters had filled my head, for I was momentarily speechless. He tried every way to make me talk, holding me pitifully and pleading, "Child, call me Papa, won't you? Uncle will do too." Finally, he shook a rattle, drummed to amuse me, muttering to himself, "My child survived great peril and is blessed with fortune. Rest in peace. I can raise this little one." I should have spoken then. I should have called him Father sooner. That way, I could have called him that a little longer. He raised me for 14 years. Yet, I only called him Father for 12. What a raw deal. I sat atop the hill, drank half a flask of wine, and poured the other half onto the ground. A line of wild geese crossed the sky. Spring had come, the ice melted, and they too were heading home. 3 days later, I transported another large batch of provisions, ready to plunge into a fierce battle myself. Prince Everett had already reached the capital. The Emperor dispatched Marquis Gunning with 15,000 troops to reinforce him, eager to move the court back as soon as possible. It had been some time since I last saw Prince Everett. Entering the tent, I noticed he had grown considerably haggard, his chin shadowed with dark stubble, his cheeks sunken from weight loss. His eyes lit up at the sight of me. "You returned just in time. There's excellent news." Before he could finish, Marquis Gunning suddenly barged in uninvited, showering him with flattery. "Your Highness, this humble general arrives late. I beg your forgiveness." Prince Everett frowned, clearly suppressing a torrent of curses beneath his dignity, and gestured for him to examine the map on the table instead. I discreetly slipped away, hands tucked in my sleeves, but had barely taken a few steps when Marquis Gunning suddenly drew his blade and lunged at the prince. Fortunately, Prince Everett reacted swiftly, kicking the table aside to evade the attack before countering with his own sword. But when that bastard Marquis Gunning realized he was outmatched, he seized me instead, pressing his blade against my throat. What an unjust calamity. At the same moment, war horns blared outside the camp as voices roared. "To arms! Marquis Gunning has rebelled." The sounds of battle raged outside the tent, and suddenly it all became clear to me. Marquis Gunning was Prime Minister Zhou's eldest son. In law, the Prime Minister knew full well that with Prince Everett commanding such formidable forces, a decisive victory would mean the Zhou family would be the first to face retribution. So even if the Emperor wanted peace, he couldn't agree to it. Guards swarmed in as Marquis Gunning forcibly dragged me out of the tent, none daring to stop him. By torchlight, the troops brought by Marquis Gunning charged into the camp, clashing with our forces. These imperial guards, nurtured by the Emperor, were indeed well equipped, playing deaf and dumb against barbarians, yet fierce as tigers when fighting their own kin. Just as the battle reached a stalemate, a light cavalry unit suddenly flanked the enemy in a surprise attack. With a sharp whistle, their war horses leaped high, bows drawn like crescent moons. A single arrow sent the enemy deputy general tumbling from his saddle. Marquis Gunning's troops immediately fell into disarray. At the roaring cries of "surrender and live" from our soldiers, they threw down their weapons and scattered like frightened rats. Seeing the tide had turned, Marquis Gunning tightened his grip, determined to drag me down with him in death. But my dagger was faster, piercing his wrist. His long blade clattered to the ground as another arrow shot forth, striking him squarely between the brows. Marquis Gunning toppled backward, only to be struck several more times by the enraged soldiers. A rider galloped toward me, extending his hand under the moonlit sky, flashing a row of white teeth with a grin. "Young mistress, hee. It was Hong Langqi, I should have guessed. The only one capable of rallying a guerrilla force so swiftly and mastering mounted archery to such perfection had to be him." I froze for a moment before a surge of anger welled up inside me. Grabbing his hand to mount the horse, I smacked him on the head. "If you were alive, why didn't you come find me sooner? I thought you were dead. I even set up a memorial tablet for you at Cloudsore Temple." He hastily begged for mercy, stammering again, and no, the barbarians surrounded Fu Province. I couldn't get in. I couldn't find you either. So I just focused on gathering a force. Perhaps the alcohol was getting to me. Clutching his sleeve, my nose tingled with emotion as I muttered under my breath. So stupid. Back then, my father hired a tutor for Hong Langqi and me, but the man quit within a month. It all started when the tutor asked us to recite an essay. Hong Langqi struggled for half an hour and managed only 3 words. As for me, I drew a giant turtle and secretly stuck it on the old man's beard while he dozed off. Infuriating him so much, he shouted, "These brats are beyond teaching." We were both considered hopeless fools by others, but my father always believed we'd achieve great things. And you know what? The old man had a sharp eye for talent. This sudden rebellion didn't disrupt our battle plans. At dawn the next day, Prince Everett pointed his sword toward the capital and led the charge to storm the city. I stayed in the rear, overseeing grain transport, evacuating civilians, and tending to wounded soldiers. By now, the United River Society had grown to over 100 members. These righteous merchants came from all corners of the land, some barely understanding each other's thick accents, yet they worked together seamlessly, forging a solid supply line through sheer teamwork. A pledge stamped with crimson handprints. This was their vow of trust and loyalty to one another. The siege lasted 5 days, ending only when the barbarians threw open the city gates and surrendered. I stood atop the city wall, watching the cheering soldiers and citizens below, the sound of fluttering war banners in my ears. The crimson sun hung high, casting a glow that dimmed the distant golden splendor of the imperial palace. Among Hong Lang-Chi's guerrilla cavalry was a young general named Zhao Yan, once a subordinate of Qin Gang, general of the northern border. He survived an ambush and was rescued by Hong Lang-Chi, fighting alongside them ever since. He was around my age. He deliberately climbed the wall to find me and bowed deeply in solemn respect. As I stood bewildered, Hong Lang-Chi explained that Zhao Yan had learned the grain I sent to Fu province had saved many lives, including his family, and had been endlessly grateful to me. I felt a little embarrassed. I had only done what I could. Some of that grain was bought with the lives of common folk. Some was scraped together by righteous merchants, despite the corrupt officials' endless exploitation. No palace of jade and gold can contain the vastness of the world. In the end, this land belongs to the ordinary people. I deserve no bows. If one must honor something, let it be the unyielding spirit of common folk in these troubled times. Not long after capturing the capital, the barbarians sought peace talks with our dynasty. They could no longer afford to fight, hoping to ransom their captured soldiers and pay reparations to end the conflict. By then, our incompetent emperor had already returned to the capital with great fanfare, his procession stretching over 10 miles. Upon hearing the barbarians' offer of reparations, he waved it off, saying, "Just give them something. Who doesn't lose some men in war?" When these words reached me, I was so furious I smashed an abacus and stormed into the tent where Prince Everett was still drinking with Hong Lang-Chi and others. He had just taken half a sip of wine, clutching a hardtack biscuit, and asked innocently, "Basu, why?" He didn't finish, because, with a clap of my hands, Ah Seong and a group of women entered, unfolding a bundle to drape a yellow robe over his shoulders. The robe was crudely embroidered, a goofy-looking dragon sticking out its tongue. Since none of us had ever seen a real imperial robe before, he froze in shock. When the soldiers knelt and hailed him as Your Majesty, he nearly lost his soul, staring at me wide-eyed. I held an account book right before his eyes and said softly, "Come, let's do some accounting. Let's see how much silver has been spent on you over the years. How about giving everyone a return on their investment, Your Majesty?" After the emperor returned to his beloved palace, he threw a grand banquet, indulging with his favorite concubine, and issued an edict to rebuild the Ascension Pavilion. He claimed the founding emperor had appeared to him in a dream. He was about to ascend to immortality. But what he didn't realize was that the founding emperor's dream carried a different message. "Grandson, your time is up." 2 months later, Prince Everett led his troops into the palace, dragged the still, sleeping emperor from his bed, and ran him through with a sword. The soldiers were unsatisfied, thinking his death was too merciful, so they hung his corpse on the palace gates, letting the common folk pelt it with bricks and stones until it was unrecognizable. Prince Everett ascended the throne, and his first act was to open the national treasury to aid the people. But when the treasury was opened, there was nothing left. The deposed emperor had squandered every last coin. Thus, he wielded his blade against the corrupt officials. A group of high-ranking ministers led by Prime Minister Zhou were all thrown into prison, their homes ransacked one by one. Every bit of the Su family's property that Prime Minister Zhou had swallowed was now seized and returned. I reclaimed the Su family residence, along with some old family heirlooms. The remaining silver was donated to the national treasury. Yuanbai Zhao, naturally, could not escape punishment. During his rapid rise to power, he had repeatedly framed court officials to secure his position. His past crime of forging letters that led to the extermination of the entire Zhao family was also uncovered, and he was sentenced to execution in autumn. From beginning to end, the Marquis of Dingxiang never pleaded for leniency on his behalf. Instead, he even went to the emperor to declare his loyalty, stating that Yuanbai Zhao deserved his fate. To distance himself, he deliberately revealed Yuanbai Zhao's origins. It turned out that Yuanbai Zhao's birth mother was a maid of the Marquis of Dingxiang. According to the Marquis, this maid had been shameless, climbing into her master's bed, and even after being driven out by the jealous first wife, she remained unrepentant, daring to bear a child outside the household. At that time, the primary wife had not yet borne children and could not tolerate this illegitimate eldest son, so she sent people to hunt down Yuanbai Zhao and his mother. Yuanbai Zhao's mother hid him in the city god temple. After being captured by the Marquis' servants, she refused to reveal the child's whereabouts even unto death, and was ultimately beaten to death and thrown into a mass grave. Yuanbai Zhao, however, was fortunate enough to be picked up by a passing couple named Zhao and became the young master of a wealthy family. The Marquis of Dingxiang had long since discovered that Yuanbai Zhao was his biological son, but he dared not acknowledge him. It wasn't until the primary wife passed away from illness that he secretly met with Yuanbai Zhao, hinting that as long as he returned to his ancestral family, his official career would be smooth sailing. As for the nonsense about stealing a child, of course, it was all lies. The incident back then was rather unsavory, so he thought to pin the blame on the Zhao couple, never expecting it would cost them their lives. The Marquis of Dingxiang kowtowed and bowed repeatedly to beg for forgiveness. The emperor merely replied with an acknowledgement, then had the Marquis' estate thoroughly confiscated, down to the jade stones pried from the Marquis' belt. Before Yuanbai Zhao's execution, I visited him in prison and relayed the words of the Marquis of Dingxiang, saying, "If your birth mother knew the child she worked so hard to protect turned out like this, what would she think?" Yuanbai Zhao sat, slumped against the wall, disheveled and staring blankly at me. He replied nonchalantly, "I never asked her to give birth to me. If she'd been born into nobility, she wouldn't have dragged me down." I rubbed my temples and asked again, "Before my father's death, you visited him. What did you say to push him to his end?" Yuanbai Zhao fell silent for a moment, then suddenly smirked mockingly and said, "Oh, I told him Prime Minister Zhou intended to hastily close the case. Even if he refused to confess, his entire family would be executed unless he handed over all his assets to the Prime Minister. Then, he had to die. Once the Prime Minister took the silver, he'd have no reason to pursue the case further, or it'd be confiscated by the state. As for you, an orphan girl, an adopted daughter with no blood ties, you were insignificant." Then he sighed again. "Yang Lan, I truly wanted to treat you well. It was your father who broke his word first. We clearly had a marriage agreement, yet he whispered behind my back that I was cunning and untrustworthy, while Hongling Chi was the more suitable match. If I hadn't resorted to some tricks, I would have lost to that dog of a servant, Hongling Chi." I shuddered. "Are you saying the incident where the jade bracelet was stolen, you framed him for it?" Yuanbai Zhao smirked smugly. "Yes, it was me. I bribed that old servant to hide the bracelet in his room. A mere servant, daring to compete with me for a woman." I sighed softly, thinking to myself, so there really are born monsters in this world. Perhaps Yuanbai Zhao had forgotten, or simply didn't care. That year, after he fell into the water, the one I called to save him was Hongling Chi. Hongling Chi was only a year older than him, yet he risked his life to drag him ashore. But Yuanbai Zhao's mind was shackled by hierarchy, insecure yet arrogant, sensitive yet jealous, twisting himself into a monster. Suppressing my fury, I forced calm into my voice as I told him, "It must have been truly arduous for you all these years. Rest assured, starting tomorrow, you'll be paraded through the streets for 7 days. Every deed you've done will be proclaimed to the world, ensuring your immortal fame." He immediately erupted in agitation, dragging his chains as he crawled toward me, pounding the cell bars and roaring, "Su Yonglan, just kill me, kill me." I knew him well, a man rotten to the core in private, yet obsessed with maintaining appearances in public. For him, public humiliation was more terrifying than execution. I turned and strode away, only to collide with Hong Ling-chi around the corner. His head hung low, face etched with desolation. He'd clearly overheard our exchange. I patted his head and murmured, "My father never blamed you. He knew you were a good child." Suddenly, he burst into tears, wiping his face as he clutched my sleeve and shuffled alongside me, just like when we were children, punished by my father for playing too long. He, tough, skinned and unfazed, would see me wailing and start crying too, shielding me behind him while begging my father to stop, never noticing my tears were all for show. After being paraded through the streets for 7 days, Yuanbai Zhao had gone completely mad. He was executed on the same day as Prime Minister Zhou and a group of corrupt officials, their heads displayed as a warning to all. It's worth mentioning that several female members of the Zhou family were pardoned, including Lily Zhou and her birth mother. Lily Zhou had presented evidence of Prime Minister Zhou's crimes. Moreover, she had deliberately saved me and several elders at Cloudsword Temple earlier, which counted as meritorious service. Thus, the emperor granted her plea. When the Zhou family's carriage passed me on the street, Lily Zhou lifted the curtain and our eyes met briefly. Her face showed gratitude, as if she had something to say. I merely nodded at her and moved on without stopping. With everything settled, I retrieved the Su family memorial tablet, burned paper money for my father, and rambled on in a one-sided conversation for a long time. Then, while sorting through old belongings at home, I accidentally uncovered a worn-out account book. This ledger was used by my father to record my expenses over the years. Being nothing valuable, it had been tossed carelessly into a corner. He'd always kept it hidden from me during his lifetime, daily quoting exaggerated figures to scare me. I was curious how he didn't tire of jotting down all these notes. When I flipped through it, there were no accounts at all, just a diary filled with trivial matters written in exhaustive detail. For example, he wrote, "Today Lawner ate 6 sesame cakes and gave herself a stomachache. Must not indulge her gluttony again. Today Lawner learned to write. Excellent. My daughter is truly a lady of refinement. Today Lawner tore my robe and cried in fright. The fabric was poor quality. Won't be shopping at Wu's store again. That Zhao boy is too cunning, yet Lawner fancies him. Sigh. I hope the lad won't break her heart. No, Lawner's marriage must be postponed. I need to observe whether that Zhao boy is truly worthy." I slowly turned the pages until I reached the last one. This time, it wasn't a diary entry. It was an unsent letter. "To my daughter Yonglan, your father is a failure. Though my heart yearned to serve the nation, I lacked the capability. Now at death's door, I am burdened by 3 regrets. First regret, misjudging character, leaving my son imprisoned and his true affections misplaced. Second regret, breaking my own promise, failing to see my son establish his family and career, surrounded by grandchildren. Third regret, unfulfilled ambitions, leaving my son alone to face wolves on all sides. Now, as we part, I pray you take care. With your strength, resolve, and wisdom, you will surely see the sun break through the clouds. Your father has but one wish for you. May you be free from illness and calamity, and eat heartily." Tears fell on the paper, blurring the ink. I tried to wipe them away, only smudging it further, until I finally held the ledger and wept freely. From beginning to end, my father believed he had failed me. He raised me, gave me his all, schemed at every turn, yet still felt it wasn't enough. What virtue or merit do I possess to have both birth parents and adoptive father pour their hearts out, shielding me with their lives? The flames in the brazier crackled, the unburned spirit money fluttering in the wind, embers rising and falling until they turned to ash. The departed flow like water, while the living remain as distant as stars. the flood of my childhood, the fleeting romance of my youth, and the current sense of loss, all suddenly faded away. Only longing remained, tightly wound around my heart, impossible to unravel or articulate, an endless ache seeping into my bones. I sat in the ancestral hall for a long time, until dawn broke. The fire in the brazier had long extinguished, leaving only a wisp of smoke. I rose, took the abacus my father once used, and strode into the morning light. Though the war had ended, there was much to rebuild. Countless commoners still could not afford food or clothing. His Majesty ennobled me as the Marquis of Peace, making me the first female Marquis in the dynasty. The court officials dared not oppose, for the imperial treasury was empty, salaries unpaid, and our new emperor was notoriously short-tempered, seeing corrupt officials everywhere and ordering confiscations every few days. After me, a group of female officials also took their places at court. His Majesty welcomed talents far and wide, gathering wisdom for a 5-year plan to restore prosperity. I was often dispatched as an imperial envoy to inspect various regions. Hong Lang-chi refused official posts, insisting on being my guard as we traveled together across mountains and rivers. We witnessed common folk receiving land allocations, ensuring every tiller had their own field. We saw people voluntarily constructing canals and dikes, transforming swamps into fertile farmland where golden rice stretched to the horizon, and barefoot children laughed as they dashed along the ridges. The United River Society remained active among the people, with merchants supporting one another to help small businesses establish firm roots. The villagers of Huchuan returned to their homeland and rebuilt the ferry port. Merchant ships docked one after another, laden with regional specialties that connected distant lands. The sound of children reciting lessons echoed from schoolhouses, while new girls' schools and charity houses sprang up across the provinces. My father had always been a coward, afraid of death, even flinching at falling leaves. How could he have died like this? He married the love of his life, a lovely girl with almond eyes, peach, blossom cheeks, and a spirited gaze between her brows. She eagerly called me chief, and said I'd given her a ride many years ago, leaving me momentarily dazed. I faintly recalled the early days of the war when she, among displaced refugees, had begged me to take her to Fu province to find her family. I smiled softly and said, "How wonderful, we survived." She nodded vigorously, her dimples showing as she beamed. Yes, we survived. In the end, I went to visit Xiang again, that girl whose smile was just as radiant. She now lived in the charity house with children who had lost their parents, becoming an elder sister to a group of orphans. The charity house had hired a tutor to teach them reading and writing. Xiang's face was glowing with health, adorned with freshly picked flowers from the children. She reached out and gently touched my cheek. "I finally know what you look like. Big boss. You'll go to faraway places and see many, many wondrous things. Won't you? When you return, tell me all about your adventures." I extended my pinky finger and hooked it with hers. Promise. When the third 5-year period ended, I left the court, taking Hong Lang-chi with me. I resigned before His Majesty. His Majesty was still as prone to tears as ever, his eyes red as he said he couldn't bear to part with us. I told him to cut the sentimental act. When I returned, the treasury had better double, and the people should have meat at every meal. I warned him not to slack off, or I'd spread tales of his laziness wherever I went. He quickly wiped away his tears and asked me where I was going. I replied, "I will cross borders, scale mountains, and ford rivers to see with my own eyes how vast this world is. I will walk step by step, forging a path of exchange. I'll bring back foreign riches and take our goods to distant lands. I want our dynasty to prosper, our people to live free from foreign oppression, our rivers to run clear, our seas to be calm, and all nations to come bearing tribute." Then I turned to Hong Lang-chi and asked, "Are you coming?" He rubbed the little black horse's head and answered with a smile, "I'm in." We galloped off into the distance. The chime of ancient bells echoed through the white clouds, while behind us, Seasons turned, dynasties rose and fell, and a new world took shape.